Good morning and welcome to today's episode of Reflect and Revive. My name's Naomi Bussinger, and today we're going to be talking about how when God pours out passion on our lives or purpose or gives us a promise, we want to run after and chase it down and say, I have to fill in the blank. But oftentimes it must start with a I have to wait. So let's talk a little bit about Christmas. I love Christmas. I am one of those people. Growing up, we always had Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house for the family. So we pretty much decorated for Christmas the week before because when everybody came over, we wanted them to see our house decorated for Christmas. And if you ever had the pleasure of being in my parents' home during the Christmas season, you will know that you have stepped directly into the North Pole, into the vast winter wonderland that it is, a place that consists of probably over 100 AA batteries and all of the moving, singing things and snow and birds and Christmas trees and lights, and somehow it's not gaudy at all, it's gorgeous. Like, my favorite thing in the world is to just sit in there by the fireplace, drinking a cup of joe. It's very relaxing. It's very beautiful. And I was reflecting on this the other day. I was thinking about my childhood. I don't know how my dad did it, but somehow he got the prettiest artificial Christmas tree when we were children. And they still use it today. It is downright gorgeous. And it's one of those old school ones where like each individual branch goes into that center base. So it was like a nightmare putting it together. And for a few years, it was like a stress moment because we're trying to figure out which ones go next, what color is the next size, and you're putting it on there only to see you have to take it apart and try again. And eventually, my dad was like, why aren't we writing this down? So we started writing down the order. It's been fine ever since, and I'm sure by now Dad's like memorized it. But during that time, I remember begging, I want to help you put the Christmas tree up. And 20 minutes in, I'd be done, like no longer interested in that. Dad's over there back aching, bent over, trying to put things still together, and Mom's hours later still putting up stuff, and we're just playing because we definitely lost interest. And when I was over at their house a couple of weeks ago, Dad walked me outside and he was showing me their apple tree, and I was thinking, man, how much easier would it be to be an apple tree versus a Christmas tree? The decorations on the apples just come naturally. You don't have to go through all the painstakingly decor routines with a Christmas tree. And I think that that's probably a great example as to why the Word calls us to kind of shape our lives around a fruit tree, or model our lives after fruit trees rather than Christmas trees. So let's look at a scripture that kind of talks about that. It's John chapter 15, verse 4. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. So the first part of that says, remain in me as I also remain in you. Being a fruit tree is less about decorating and more about remaining. And remaining takes a lot of waiting. And waiting requires a lot of patience and obedience. Because the fruit, at least good fruit, it's not produced overnight. We know this from how agriculture works. Good fruit requires an ample amount of nutrients, water, rich soil, time spent in the sun. I mean, the metaphors for this go on for ages. But if we wait on Him while remaining in Him, our lives become fruitful naturally. So much so that as people come by, they can take pieces of the fruit and there will still be more to pass around, just like a healthy producing apple tree. Of course, sometimes we run short on patience and waiting. And I think that when that happens, we fall short of fully receiving God's promises. When we want to be quick, and instead of remaining and waiting like a fruit tree, we're trying to take ourselves as Christmas trees and we're trying to quickly just pack on fruits of the Spirit, gentleness and kindness and understanding and compassion, and it's hard work and the effort really turns out in vain, because like ornaments on a Christmas tree, those fruits just kind of fall off when we're not really developing them. When we're just slapping them on for Sunday morning church, they just fall off and shatter on our hypothetical floors. And they don't mean anything because they're not real. They're just temporary. So let's dive into the scripture, because this place of waiting, this place of being given a promise and then having to wait, that's where we find Abraham. And we find that in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Let's read that together. Now the Lord has said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed." What a promise. And we know, obviously, from the Bible that it comes true, but just as a proving point, I guess you would say, the very first scripture in the New Testament, Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, rings true of that promise. This is a list of the ancestors of Jesus Christ, a descendant of David, who was a descendant of Abraham. All of the promises that he was given came true. Now, all people are blessed through Abraham, because it's through his family line that Jesus was born. And we know that Jesus changes everything. Now, let's imagine the scene. God shows up and he lays out this grand promise, a promise in which, by the way, not only does Abraham not see in his lifetime, his children do not see in their lifetime, but it requires such an amount of waiting that it takes thousands of years for it to come to fruition. Now, that's some serious waiting. Can you imagine right now being asked to wait that long? What would your response be? Is there a promise like that in your life right now? Is there something that you feel stirring in your heart that God has set you out to do that maybe seems unfathomable? One that feels so far beyond reach, maybe it's even funny to you? One that you're positive that you'll never see in your lifetime? Well, the story continues on. Not only is it a matter of waiting in which Abraham doesn't see it fully develop, but God promises Abraham that all people will be blessed through him. But there's a reality in this story that's at work that's very sobering, because the way in which that is going to happen is through his wife, Sarah, who is barren. How can people be blessed when not even one can be blessed through him? I can't imagine being them and the amount of faith that it took. So what do we do when we have an I have to, or a promise that's given by God that we know with certainty requires some amount of waiting. Abraham shows us what to do. If you continue reading chapter 12, verses 4 through 5, it says, "So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Then Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all of their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan." He took a step of obedience. Have you ever been in these times that we're talking about right now? You're kind of like in a holding pattern, waiting on what's been promised for you, when you're yearning for that like one thing that's right out there on the horizon, just beyond your vision, and still more obedience is required. And it's just what seems like this continual, everlasting waiting game. Put yourself in Abraham and Sarah's shoes, because what they're showing us is obedience in spite of. This is what obedience in spite of means. It doesn't always make a whole lot of sense to us. We may not see how God's promise is going to come to fruition. We may not understand his ways or how in the world he's going to work something out. Abraham had no idea how in the world God was going to make him the father of all nations, and Sarah certainly did not know at all how she was going to give birth to a child. But they took a step of obedience, and they walked out of their family's land and walked to Canaan, and they chose to walk in faith in spite of their earthly understanding, in spite of circumstances not seeming like they were going to make any sense to them at all today. Is that you? Are you experiencing something like this in your life? If I'm not mistaken, being called a child of God puts us in that lineage of Abraham. When God gives us an "I have to," it's because right around the corner, perhaps even out of sight, is a huge blessing. Partnering with God as his beloved children, included in his plan and his purposes. You'll never know a greater joy, greater delight, greater sense of peace than taking that step of obedience in spite of. There will never be more of a sense of calmness than in those moments in life. It's so worth it. So I asked you before, let me revisit this question that I posed to you earlier, and I want you to just really take it in and think on it. Just marinate on it. What step of obedience is God calling you to right now? How can you reach for the unfathomable by doing the fathomable? I love you. I'm praying for you, and I hope you have a great weekend.